Dr. Mukesh Kumar. Dr. Mukesh Kumar holds a very impressive achievement profile. Currently, Dr. Mukesh serves as the Officer of Senior Regulatory Affairs and Pharmacovigilance with Quality Assurance responsibilities at the Farm Dubai. He handles all the pharmacovigilance activities for the UAE region. Dr. Mukesh is also accountable for post-approval submissions for the country's drug products. He has left no domain of pharmacy unexplored as he has gained early experience not only as a professional sales representative but also as a hospital pharmacist and a lecturer. With that brief introduction, we welcome you, sir. So, we have very few speakers who work in the legal section related to pharmaceutical care. So, we are really privileged to have you, and we're really eager to know what you have to share from your side.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sophia. It was a nice introduction. I hope I'm audible. Is it fine?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. If you would you be sharing slides, sir?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. We can see your slides. If you could put it on slideshow and you can begin, sir.
Oh, pilot.
Thank you very much. Today, as requested by Dr. Uday to represent a topic of patient-reported outcome as a part of your conference, I'm pleased to be a part, and it is very delightful from my side that I'm able to provide some of my experience, which was been collected as well as done some research online. So without delay, I will start the presentation, which is more specific towards the patient's reported outcome. As per the part of S4, only the outcome part I think is pending in this conference, and I will be covering the outcome research part and how the reported outcomes are very important in terms of research as well as in clinical practice. So the objective of this presentation is specifically, just give me 1 minute. I'm not able to view my slides because of, yeah. So the objective is at the end of this activity, the participants will be able to define what is the patient-reported outcome, as well as to understand the importance of patient-reported outcome, and to discuss how to measure and how to evaluate the patient-reported outcome, and to select appropriate measures or PRO measures in different settings. So there are different types of PRO measures and how and where we have to fit in the PRO in different settings, like in clinical research or in clinical setting or in healthcare provider setting. So there are different settings where we have to go fit in the PRO. So the most important thing is outcomes, how they are important. The outcome as per the patient perspective is more important. There are different perspectives we can see during the clinical practice, like this. If we see the third person's perspective as a parents, we want to give as much as possible enjoyment to the kid. As a kid, as a kid is like a third person, and we are trying to give him best possible enjoyment with giving some toys in front of him so as he can sleep. But as a patient, as a kid, when he sees, what he sees is like this, which is totally different. We don't know what that is a perspective of patient, how he sees the given our inputs is totally different. So it is more important that we should have a practice which contributes everything. And nowadays, it is patients are more engaged in every terms. Everywhere there is a revolution where patients are becoming very, very educative, and they are more active, and they are performing their own role in terms of treatment and outcomes of their own treatment. So it is now there are lots of organizations which are a voice of patients, and they are there is a change in the outcomes which are being expected from the patient side also. So that's where the whole paradigm shift has been changed from the historic perspective, where the regulators, the providers, and the payers usually used to give their inputs in terms of how we can improve the patient, which has been currently changing towards the patient centric outcomes, where the providers, payers, and regulators, they are in hand to hand provides and understand what the patient needs, and trying to provide whatever is patient requirement. It's individual patient's requirement changes, and that's why the individual properties of different sectors of healthcare system has to change accordingly. There are lots of definitions which are provided, and there are three different types of definition provided. One is patient-centric process, which is I try to collect the information wherever possible. So I have taken lots of bits and pieces from different sections where there are three different patient categories has been defined. That is patient-centric studies or patient engagement studies and patient-reported outcomes. So these are the main objectives of current scenarios where a clinical trial or a patient engagement or in a clinical practice has been divided into three different sectors, which is patient centric process, or either patient engagement or patient reported outcomes has been involved. So the patient centric process involves patient as a center point, and all other providers will focus on the patient, whereas the patient engagement is referred to as active involvement, meaningful, authentic, and collaborative interaction between patient and researcher, where patient also is a part of a trial, as well as he also decides and he gives this decision, as well as he gives his information that whether the experience is unique or valuable, or what is the expertise he gains during the process. And that's now becoming a part of trial also. And ultimately the patient reported outcome is the oldest part, where outcomes are being determined from the patient's sector. So there are different clinical outcome measures that is made by which experience has been measured. Especially the center part is patient-related outcomes, where the patients usually give their uh, outcomes directly. Other than that, there are like clinical reported outcomes, clinicians reported outcomes, where the assessment was performed by the trained medical professionals. Other than that, there is observers reported outcomes, where the assessments were performed by the observer, like non-clinicians, like teacher or caregiver or parents or whoever is associated with the person. Other than that, there is performance-related outcomes, which are measured by giving some tasks to the patient, and then we evaluate that. And currently, there are variables, which is now technology-related aspects. Passive measurement, which is directly come from the patients, like Fitbits and other new apps which has been introduced into the market. So there are different categories. That's where the patient-related outcomes can be different, can be reported by different ways, which are like clinician reported, which are been reported by the clinicians, physiological, caregivers, and patient reported. So we are now focusing on the patient-reported outcomes, which is strongly associated with the healthcare quality of life and the satisfaction of patient. So let's start with the my expertise, where the regulatory aspects has also been introduced into the patient-related outcomes, where in 2009 there was a guidelines from the US FDA, which has been introduced, which provides or which highlights how the patient label claims can be changed based upon the patient-reported outcomes and studies, as well as EMEA has also introduced in 2004 specific guidelines related to the how patient-related outcomes has been introduced in product labels. And recently, there was a change in requirement with the patient medical devices, where the use of patient-reported outcome in assessment of the effectiveness of medical devices has been introduced in the European Union. There are lots of new changes coming up throughout the from the regulators also, in terms of providing the patient-reported outcomes and the claims for the specific disease or specific medicine or for specific medical devices also. So, what is the patient-reported outcome? The in FDA 2009 has defined it as a measurement based on the reports coming directly from the patient about their health condition without amendment or interpretation by a clinician or anyone else. It should be, or it has to be from the patient, and it has to be exactly what he feels. Now, patient-reported outcome covers a variety of clinical and humanistic domains. Especially, it is like physical function. It measures mental and health-related, emotional health of the patient, social functioning of the patient, and health-related quality of life. PROs provides critical insights of the overall well-being of an individual and their response to the treatment, not specifically, the patient-reported outcomes will not cover the patient history or specific part of portion of patient medical condition. It is specifically the outcome of the treatment or something intervention which has been done. Most of the time, there are two terms which are usually being interchangeably used in the patient-reported outcome. One is the health quality of life and health-related quality of life. These are interchangeable interchangeable terms, but they are totally different, and we have to be aware of what is about. The quality of life is overall individual's perspective about his life, where it includes the culture and where it includes a person's goal, expectation, and standards and concern about his life. Whereas health-related quality of life is specific, which reflect the impact of the disease and treatment on disability or daily functioning of a patient. And it also been considered to reflect the impact of perceiving health on an individual's ability to live a fulfilling life, which is very more important. So, in clinical research as well as in clinical practice, the health-related quality of life is more important, and we always consider health-related quality of life is a domain where we have to more focused in. Now, PROs are, as I told, is patient centric, and it involves lots of information which can be used either by clinicians or researchers or healthcare system or other clinical providers as well as government agencies, which we'll discuss how it will help out. The value of PROs are more important for the patients and clinicians because it prioritizes the individual patients, how to improve their conditions, how to take the decision based upon the outcomes of reported by the patient, and prioritizing treatment and monitoring their disease symptoms and healthcare status is more important for the clinician. Whereas PROs are also important for health leaders and clinicians, where it gives importance about quality improvement section, where they can monitor and provide improve the aggregate patient outcome and provide best practice outcomes and match the benchmark which has been set by the authorities. Whereas it is also important, PRO is important for the insurers and health leaders in terms of designing or reducing the value based of payment, wherever the measurements of outcome can be compared in terms of cost and utilization can be done with help of PROs. And at last, not the least, the researchers, policymakers, and fundraisers, it is important for them to understand the bulk and population PRO data, where they will can decide what are the guidelines, and they can generate a new evidence on the best practice guidelines based upon the PROs. Now, the term comes how to measure PRO. It's very common. When we used to practice in Manipal, we always used to go bedside and ask the patient, "Hi Gadre, how are you? How's the life? How you are feeling?" That was a simple question, and we used to. That was the question based upon the answer of patient or reaction of patient. We can determine how the patient is feeling and whether the treatment is effective or not, or whether the patient needs some more treatment, more focused treatment, or it is okay, or we can go ahead with that. But that was a simple question, or whether we can asking a simple question like how you are, or are you doing fine, or are you able to walk, or are you having pain or not. That is not sufficient. We should have a elaborated and measurements which provides you the information about patient. So the patient reported outcome measures are the questions that allow patient to directly report their experience with the disease symptoms or well-being without modifying the healthcare team members. So there is no involvement of healthcare team members. There is a set process of questionnaire. So the PRO measurements can provide clinically meaningful information and the patient-centric insights into the screening, diagnosis, and response to the treatment. That's more important as part of. So the patient-reported outcome measures, or we also call it as prompts, are the standardized valid set of questions that collects health status, functional status, symptoms, and problems directly from the patient, and they are usually either by the direct involvement of patient interviews or providing them a scale to measure it. So there are lots of scales available, which are like Likert scales or visual analog scales or pictograms or rating scales or checklists. So these are the examples of maximum number of responsive scales which we usually take into consideration while performing a PR questionnaire. Now, the questionnaire is an instrument, and there are different types of instruments available, which are been introduced in market in since 2000 or in 1980s, and it has been introduced like a generic scale. Like example is SF36, SF12, or WHO quality of life of questionnaire, which is generic, which involves overall generic questionnaire without any specific disease involvement. So there was a introduction of disease specific questionnaire like RA quality of life or KD quality of life or D quality of life, which is specific to the specific disease condition. Other than that, there are domain specific questionnaires which are like back depression inventory, McGill pain questionnaires, physical activity index, self rating depression scales. There are lots of domain specific questionnaires also available. Region and site specific like Cambridge pulmonary hypertension outcome report overviews, and different sites also involved. And there are utility measures like health utility index, EQ 5D, which is the measure questionnaire, which is utility measurement involvement, which takes the outcomes of the uh, patient reported. Now, it is important to understand what are the patient-reported outcome measure tools need to have with certain type of quality, which is like standardized assessment should be done through these instruments. Often there are measurement which need to be. We are doing the measurement very often because we are doing on a certain number of patients, and it should give specific outcome to every time. So the prompts are developed throughout attractive psychometric and clinical content review and validate among target patient population to evaluate the psychometric property before use. So it is very important to focus on the psychometric properties. Now, there are lots of terminology which has been used. Now, most important part is psychometric properties of the prompts, which involves the validity, which is validity is of a question or of a measurement is a sound and accuracy, how accurate the questionnaire is. The results are specific to the objective or not. Whether the measurements is observing the measures which are supposed to be measures or not, and the contents and the construction is valid or not. We have to make sure that validity is there. The questionnaire need to be validated every time when we prepare it according to the objectives. Not only the validity, the reliability is also important, which in terms is whenever we do a repetitive test of a questionnaire, it should produce a consistent outcome, and it should produce the reproducibility of the outcome of this questionnaire should be perfect. So the reliability is necessary, but it's not sufficient without validity. It is important that both validity and reliability is consistent for the questionnaire. I will discuss it in a more focused way. Let's take an example when we are going for a target practicing. There is a target practice like this, and we have to hit the bullseye, that is the red dot where we get the 10 points. The objective is to hit the bullseye. Similarly, when we are doing a PRO instrument analysis, we have to hit the bullseye, which is the objective of our questionnaire, whether we are observing the same outcome or not. Now, when we do a certain type of practice where we hit the board, but it is not onto the bullseye, but it is hitting somewhere, but it is in a reliable, precise, reliable manner in a certain area, but it is not able to hit the bullseye. But it is reliable, but it's not precise. It is not precise, but it is reliable. But this type of data is not helpful because it is not providing you a required data, information. Now, there is another example where we are hitting the bullseye once or twice, or we are nearby, which is not precise, but it is reliable because it is hitting the board. This type of data is also not type of instrument is not useful. Whereas another type is not reliable and not valid, where is not no precisement and no accuracy, where you can hit anywhere and you are not getting any type of outcome. So what is the requirement? You should hit precisely where it is required, and you should hit repeatedly wherever it is required. That is the bullseye. Repeatedly and accurately, you have to get the outcomes. Not only validity and reliability, we have to have responsiveness of the prompts. That is the ability to detect changes in healthcare system or healthcare status. The minimality clinical important difference, which is been measured in terms of pain scale also, where you are identifying how much is the minimum change in pain scale is important in terms of do any intervention in terms of outcome. Now there are different steps which are involved in terms of making patient reported outcome measures. There are different steps. There are 4 steps where you do a step by step process, and you will find out how the scale has been developed. Whenever you have a question that you are going to find out the outcome of a certain intervention, you make it as a conceptual illustration and you find out what are the requirements during that process. And based upon that, you will that is the first step where you're conceptualizing the question and giving it to the person, open interviews based upon the concept for 3 to 6 months, and based upon that you're making a rating scale choices. That is step 2, and giving it to the review board meeting and providing their approval that whatever you have find it out scale which have been selected has been approved by the board. And then you go for the step third, where cognitive debriefing has been done, and you check close interview with the patients and about their understanding and whether the scales which you have selected is accurate or not. And then you go for psychometric test, where you check in population check for 1 month and find out whether your questionnaire has been providing you accuracy, validated accurate outcomes or not. Now, when you go for a clinical trial, prompts are very important, and when you have to decide it, how you decide it depends upon different types of questions you have to select to determine to recommend a PRO is required in the clinical trial or not. The most important is the basic question: what is the construction or what you are going to measure? Understand the disease, then what is the potential benefit and harm of the treatment. You understand that, and then at the same time go to the clinicaltrials.gov and find out what others are doing for the similar type of study, and do a literature review for understanding what type of PRO is recommended. Not only that, if the conceptual model is different, how it is matter to the patient. The quantitative literature review, quantitative patient interviews, and development of the conceptual model is more important. Not only that, you have to consider how the language is, how the regulatory requirement is, how frequent you have to administer that questionnaire, how the questionnaire will be administered, either is paper based or in the clinical is online based, or how it will be. Then depending upon all the parameters, you have to recommend what type of PR you are selecting and where you have to select. As you know, the phases of clinical trials nowadays, it is important, and the regulators has been asking where you are using the PROs. Now, this is the slide where we know these are the phases of clinical trials where the PROs are being instrumented in all settings from phase 1 to the post-launch or phase 4 trials, where you have to identify patients' outcome in each section of the phases of clinical trials, and you have to provide the data to the regulators that what was the outcome and what was the patient's feeling, not only the data which was collected during the clinical trials as per the requirement of regulation. The patient reported outcome is also a part of the outcomes of the each sections of these clinical trials, where you have to provide the information, as well as the regulators will ask, the payers will ask, and providers will ask after the launch of the page, launch of the product. So that is now a part of decision making, where PROs are playing a role in terms of introducing a product into the market. Now there are different methods which are existing. These are the methods which are generally being employed. The oldest method, a paper-based method, which is old-fashioned good method, where you go and interview the patient. Now, other than that, in 1980s there was interactive voice response, or IVR method, where telephonic interviews was done. There are nowadays there are patient smart devices are there, dedicated handle devices issued to the patient for the study, or it will be there in the hospital for each time. You can give links to the patient, where web links have been designed, and patient can go to the website and provide their information. Or there nowadays they are very much in trend, especially in Dubai and other countries, like bring your own devices and allow the patient and the site to download an application. You can provide an application and ask the patient to provide the information required. So those devices are like this, where you have a specific condition like rheumatoid arthritis, and you'll ask the patient which arm you have the pain, and what is the structure of pain, how the pain is, and there may be a scale where you can give, which is very user friendly, and patient can have it and provide the information very easily through using this. And nowadays everyone is using such type of information. Along with that, there are other examples of data collection from variables, like Fitbits and other devices like MFit and Adobe GMC monitors, which are now being a part of clinical trials most of the time. So these are the devices which have been used, and data measures during the trials. And examples like actigraphy is the activity monitor, which will monitor your activities, like steps, hours of sleeping, and when you are, how frequent you are leaving the home, duration, and all those. Examples are like Fitbit and Genactive and other devices, which are being used for neurological, Parkinson's, and endocrine disorders. Whereas sleep devices, glucometers, insulin devices, well, there are spirometric devices which have been used, and vital measurements has been done by Philips biosensor, which are now becoming very important part of clinical trials. And the studies, if you see, this is a slide which I got it recently, which says after the launch of iPhone in 2008, where the involvement of these type of devices and equipments were like approximately below 100, and has been increased by 34% in since then, in last 10 years. And now most of the devices are being used in clinical trials to monitor the patient outcomes. So in the summary, it is important to have reported outcomes in terms of benefiting patients, where we can provide a specific outcome as per the patient's requirement. Not only that, we have providers, and it helps the providers and clinicians to decide what type of intervention has been needed. And it is important for healthcare system also to provide and deliver the required settings to the patients in terms of providing best outcomes. And finally, for the payers and policy makers, it is important to get the population health data and provide help them to provide the guidelines towards it. I hope these are the references, and I hope this helps you somewhere to understand what is a
Yes, sir.
patient-reported outcome.
That was a very informative presentation. Honestly, I was thinking of how I was going to ask you how you would connect your profession being in post approval submissions with patient clinical outcomes, and that's when you began. So I think you've covered every area. Sir, I have one question to you. You mentioned about using devices, and you spoke about scales as well. So, what is commonly used, and what would you recommend for more validity? Because we use a lot of validation methods for our questionnaires, we get them validated, and that's when we use it. But if we use, those watches that you mentioned, actigraphy, I think that's one device that is being used by all youngsters now in fashion, recording all activity. So, how would you weigh out both of them, sir?
See, nowadays it is important, and it's a need of an hour where we have to go with the patient's way of thinking. Yeah, the validity of such type of data need to be defined, as well as it is important that you have to have a specific parameters how you can define it and validate it. But there are trials, if the clinicaltrials.gov, if you go and find out, there are Fitbits and other instruments are being used, and they are being part of a question or part of the outcome measures. It is a one part of outcome measure. It's not a whole section based upon that. These type of devices are the part of outcome measures. You can just have, because of COVID also, now you can have an opportunity to introduce these type of devices, so as
Devices.
you can get the outcomes based of sitting somewhere and finding out how the patient is doing, just to download the app
Right.
into the patient's mobile and just observe it. That's it.
So, sir, what is the most common practice in the hospitals in Dubai there? Or in
In Dubai, usually Fitbits are very, very commonly used. There are devices which monitor ECG as well as blood pressures. There have been 24 hours blood monitoring devices have been given, and usually the ECG and blood pressure monitoring are been done in UAE very frequently, 24 hours for a patient, but not as a clinical trial. The clinical trial section are totally different in terms of these things.
okay, okay. Okay, sir. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for being a part of this conference. Like I mentioned earlier, I think it's very difficult to have a personnel who is qualified in the legalistic side. So having you on board with us is really a merit on our side. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much. I will especially thanks Dr. Uday, being a friend, my roommate, and it was a pleasure. And I was also being confused how I've been going to justify it. There are lots of regulatory requirements in terms of providing and claiming patient-related outcomes,
Right.
and to introduce in terms of product claims. And there, that's where we have to introduce the patient reported outcome also.
Yes, sir.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much for providing me an opportunity.